The air outside the wedding hall was thick with anticipation, the kind that lingers before a curtain rises and reveals what's really been hiding behind it. My heels clicked against the polished stone floor, each step echoing louder than the last as I pulled the glass doors open. I expected to see my relatives waiting, neatly seated, gossiping in their hushed, judgmental tones. I expected the stiff smiles, the obligatory nods, the cold glances that had trailed me my entire life. Instead, the sight that struck me nearly stole the breath from my lungs. Rows upon rows of unfamiliar faces stared back at me. Men with weathered coats pulled tightly around their shoulders. Women with tired eyes, clutching worn handbags. A few children fidgeting, their hair tangled, their shoes frayed. In the space where my family should have been prim and polished, clutching programs like trophies, there sat strangers. Not a handful, not a scattering, but 150 souls who had clearly been dragged from the streets. And in the far corner, exactly where I knew they'd be, sat my family. My father leaning back, smirking with a kind of satisfaction that made my stomach tighten. My mother whispering behind her hand, her eyes sharp as glass. My cousins chuckling, as though this display were entertainment meant for them alone. "Look at this disaster," my aunt's voice carried, not even attempting to hide the cruelty. "She's marrying trash, and now she's surrounded by it." Their words floated above the room like smoke, ugly, suffocating, deliberate. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know I had already seen the knife they intended to twist. I had discovered their plan days earlier, hidden in an email thread not meant for my eyes, their mocking laughter spelled out in text messages as if their malice was a family heirloom to be passed around. They had reached out to shelters, to soup kitchens, pretending generosity just to orchestrate this display. They thought the shame would crush me before the vows were spoken. I didn't flinch. Instead, I walked straight toward the microphone at the center of the stage. The room quieted, not because they respected me, but because they were waiting for the spectacle. Waiting for me to crumble, for the tears to stream, for the chaos to begin. My fiancé caught my gaze from across the aisle, his eyes steady, his jaw set. He knew. He had known the moment I told him what they were planning, and together we had built something else, something that turned their cruelty into a stage they couldn't control. "Welcome," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. It rang through the hall, clear, steady, undeniable. "Welcome, honored guests. Today is not about judgment. Today is not about shame. Today, instead of being mocked, you'll be celebrated." There was a ripple across the room. My relatives exchanged looks, confusion creasing their brows for the first time. Their certainty faltered, just slightly, as I motioned toward the back doors. The staff we had hired stepped forward, pushing carts draped in linen. Covered trays gleamed beneath silver lids. Boxes stacked neatly, filled with warm clothing, shoes, blankets. Care packages sealed with ribbon. Volunteers, real volunteers, not pawns in a cruel prank, began handing them out one by one to the very people my family had dragged here as a joke. The strangers who moments ago looked uncertain now stared wide-eyed as steaming plates were placed in their hands, as jackets were draped over shoulders, as shoes replaced broken soles. Murmurs of disbelief swelled into voices of gratitude, filling the hall with something genuine, something my family had never been capable of producing. I didn't need to glance at them to know their faces had changed. I could feel the sting of their shock from across the room. What was meant to be my humiliation was now unraveling in front of them, slipping out of their grip. But I wasn't done, because seated at the front, almost blending into the crowd, was the mayor himself. His presence had been my quiet card to play, my deliberate choice when sending invitations. And when he stood, clearing his throat, the weight of the room shifted completely. "I've been to many weddings in my career," he began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "But rarely have I seen such compassion on display. What was meant to harm has been turned into something remarkable. And for that, I'm proud to announce a grant in your names. Funds that will go directly to supporting shelters in this city." Applause erupted, not the polite tapping of hands that my relatives were used to, but a thunderous, overwhelming wave that rose from the very people they had used as props. Strangers stood to their feet, clapping, some even wiping tears as they cheered. The gratitude in their eyes burned brighter than any jewel my family flaunted. I looked toward the corner where my family sat. The smirks were gone. My mother's lips trembled, my father's jaw tightened, my cousins shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their plan hadn't just failed, it had collapsed into something far worse. They weren't spectators to my ruin. They were the spectacle. They had mocked me, but it was their cruelty now exposed. Their laughter turned hollow in a room filled with voices stronger than their whispers. The applause hadn't faded when the press cameras started flashing. At first, only a few reporters had been invited, people I trusted to document the day honestly. But once the mayor's announcement spread through whispers and phone alerts, more media arrived at the hall in waves. The doors opened, photographers spilled in, lenses raised, microphones extended. What was meant to be a spectacle of shame had transformed into a headline that would travel far beyond those walls. I stood at the altar with my fiancé, holding his hand, the weight of his presence anchoring me. Across the room, the rows of once skeptical faces now beamed. Strangers who had walked in expecting scorn sat straighter, shoulders lifted, dignity restored. They clapped again, louder, their cheers echoing through the hall until it was impossible to ignore. My family tried. They shifted in their seats, pretending composure, but the spotlight refused to move away. Each camera seemed to find them, capturing their stiff expressions, the awkward stillness that revealed more than words ever could. My aunt leaned toward my mother, whispering urgently, but it was useless. Their plan had already disintegrated. The mayor approached me directly, shaking my hand with a firmness that carried weight. "What you've done here is remarkable," he said for the microphones nearby. "You've taken cruelty and turned it into compassion. That deserves recognition." He gestured to the crowd behind him, reporters scribbling notes, photographers capturing every angle. "This city needs more people like you." The hall erupted again. My family stayed frozen, their power draining with each word spoken. My father's face had hardened into a mask, his pride injured beyond repair, but he refused to leave. Leaving would mean admitting defeat. So he sat, jaw tight, watching his carefully crafted humiliation burn away. Then came the vows. We spoke them not just to each other, but to the room filled with people who now felt like witnesses with genuine hearts, not spectators of cruelty. Every promise echoed differently in that atmosphere, as though the words themselves carried more strength when surrounded by unexpected allies. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was fierce, raw, overwhelming. When the ceremony ended, the reception began, and the energy only grew. Tables once meant for distant relatives now overflowed with the guests my family had dragged in as pawns. They laughed, they ate, they shared stories. Volunteers kept serving food, children danced near the stage, and the room felt alive in a way no wedding I'd ever attended had felt. What should have been a cold display of wealth and pretense had turned into a celebration of resilience and community. But I knew the real weight of the day wasn't in the laughter or the gratitude. It was in the silence from the corner table, where my family sat like statues. They hadn't touched their plates. They hadn't joined the crowd. They were marooned in their own bitterness, watching the joy they couldn't extinguish. My cousins checked their phones obsessively, already realizing photos and videos were spreading online faster than they could control. Their whispers grew sharp, frantic, but their words couldn't undo what had been captured. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. Every camera angle, every headline forming in real time, was enough to strip away their pretense. What they had tried to orchestrate was now public knowledge, and soon the city would know not just what I had done, but what they had attempted. Still, I could feel their eyes drilling into me, a mixture of resentment and disbelief. They had underestimated me, counted on silence and submission, the way they always had. But I had turned their stage into mine, and they had no lines left to deliver. The moment that sealed it came when the mayor raised his glass, not with alcohol, but with water, clear and unpretentious. "To the bride and groom," he said, his voice cutting through the music and chatter. May your marriage be as strong as the compassion you've shown today. May this city remember this day not as a wedding ruined, but as a community reborn. The hall rose to its feet. Strangers cheered my name, clapping in rhythm, chanting until the sound rattled the walls. My husband squeezed my hand, and I felt the weight of the past, the years of dismissal, of ridicule, of being made the family scapegoat, slip away. For the first time, their power over me cracked, and they knew it. Across the room, cameras caught my mother's face as she tried to smile, but the corners of her lips refused to cooperate. The footage would play again and again, her discomfort immortalized. My father stared at the tablecloth, refusing to lift his eyes, knowing the world outside those walls was already consuming the story. My cousins fidgeted, trapped in a humiliation they had crafted themselves. The irony was brutal, and I let it sit there, unspoken but undeniable. By the next morning, the headlines had already spread across every screen. Photographs of the reception flooded social media. Rows of strangers smiling with full plates, volunteers handing out boxes of supplies, the mayor raising a toast in my name. News outlets ran the story on repeat, each headline louder than the last. Bride turns family's cruelty into historic celebration. Wedding of compassion goes viral. And just as quickly, the other half of the story surfaced. Clips of my relatives smirking in a corner, their voices caught on shaky recordings mocking me before the ceremony. The internet didn't need context. It judged fast and without mercy. Their plan had not only failed but had made them national examples of arrogance and cruelty. Reporters called me nonstop. Invitations came from networks, magazines, community leaders. Everyone wanted to hear how it had unfolded. But I didn't need to explain much. The footage spoke for itself. Each replay showed exactly who had stood by me and who had tried to destroy me. The grant announced by the mayor was finalized within the week. Funds poured into shelters and food programs under my name and my husband's. The very people my family had dragged into that hall were the first to benefit, and many returned to volunteer alongside us. What began as mockery became an ongoing movement, one my family could no longer control or erase. Meanwhile, their downfall was swift. My father's business lost clients who no longer wanted to be associated with his name. My mother's carefully curated social circle turned its back on her, unwilling to stand beside someone whose cruelty had been broadcast nationwide. My cousins faced ridicule at work, their smirks frozen in screenshots passed around online. They had built a reputation on superiority, and now that image was gone forever. I didn't seek revenge beyond that. I didn't need to. The collapse of their plan had written the ending for me. Every insult, every dismissal, every attempt to undermine me had led to this moment, and now the world had seen the truth. On a quiet evening after the storm of attention had slowed, I sat beside my husband, reflecting on it all. Our wedding had not gone the way tradition dictated, but it had become something far greater. We hadn't just spoken vows to each other. We had built a foundation out of defiance, resilience, and compassion. And my family? They had written themselves out of my story. By trying to ruin me, they had exposed who they truly were. Their silence, since that day, was the only closure I needed. The chapter of their control was over. My life, our life, was finally mine to live, free from their grip. What they thought would be my humiliation had become my liberation. The plan they had built collapsed completely, and in its place, something stronger rose, a future they could never touch.